Hello everyone, welcome back. Really hope you're doing well today on December the 3rd of 2021. And I'm really excited today because we're going to talk about the last canto of Purgatorio, Canto 33 of Purgatorio. Among other reasons, it's also a very exciting and interesting canto because it gives us the answer, the general answer to what exactly Dante meant in Inferno Canto 1 when he said that he had lost his way. La diritta via era smarrita at the very beginning of Canto 1 of Inferno. We never really got a clarification from Dante, and without going into personal details, he will tell us here in this canto through Beatrice what exactly he meant there. So let's get started. The first sentence is in poetry, in biblical verses, Deus venerum gentes, alternando. This is taken from Psalm 78, and the psalm itself in the Old Testament says, O God, the heathen have come into your inheritance. Various Gentile nations had been able to invade the Holy Land because of the sins of the Jews, basically of the Jewish people. And so Dante is relating and comparing that situation to his current historic moment, where he sees that in 1300, God had allowed the French dynasty and the French king to take possession of the church, basically. And this is what he is lamenting here because of the sins of the people, because of the sins of we could call it Italian people or the people in Florence, and generally the people in the Italian peninsula. So the canto starts with this melancholy music being sung by the nymphs, the 3 and 4 nymphs, and they are desolated. Beatrice is also afflicted. She's sospirosa e pia, sighing and full of pity in the Mandelbaum translation. She is desolated for the fate of the mystical body of Jesus. And this is why Dante says, che poco più alla croce si cambiò Maria. A really very specific and very important simile here, where Dante compares Beatrice's face with Mary's face when she was under the cross, looking at her son being crucified. It's not only a beautiful simile, but it's got a very important meaning here. Dante is saying the church is the bride of Christ, so it can be related to Christ himself. What's happening to the church in these days, in this day and age, in 1300, is comparable to Jesus crucified on the cross. That's why the affliction and the desolation are a right type of feeling to have. However, even though the canto starts with this type of melancholy and sadness, very quickly it's Beatrice, revealed truth and theology and faith, who turns the mood quite quickly into a positive. And here she says on verse 10, again in Latin, modicum et non videbitis me, et iterum, sorelle mie dilette, my delightful sisters, modicum et vos videbitis me. These are the literal words that Jesus said to his apostles in the Gospel of John. John 16, verse 16, during the Last Supper. And I have here the English translation of that text, where Jesus said, a little while, and you will no longer see me, and again a little while, and you will see me. Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn, but the world will rejoice. You will have pain, but your pain will turn into joy. When a woman is in labor, she has pain, because her hour has come. But when her child is born, she no longer remembers the anguish because of the joy of having brought a human being into the world. Really, really beautiful passage. I'm not surprised that Dante chose this passage here, because there is a sense of the pain of giving birth to something and the pain of giving birth to salvation through Jesus and the foundation of the church. So Beatrice is reminding the 3 plus 4 nymphs and the virtues and of this she has a confidence in victory and in salvation. She is infusing hope into them and in everybody, because she is the revealed truth. Then from the position where she was at the bottom of the tree, she stands up and she positions all and 7 of the virtues in front of her, me, meaning Dante, la donna, Matilda, e il savio che ristette. Il savio che ristette means the sage who, or the wise man who stayed, as opposed to the il savio who didn't stay, who is Virgil, who's not here anymore. Così s'engiva. So they start walking. E non credo che fosse lo 10° suo passo in terra posto. Very interesting how Dante is counting the number of steps that Beatrice is taking here, because the number 9 is crucial. It's got the 3 times 3 divine perfection number inside of it. And Beatrice, her name Beatrice in Latin is Beatrix, with the IX at the end, which in Latin again means 9, IX. Not only that, but back in La Vita Nuova, the New Life, the book by Dante wrote many years before, he had indicated 9 as the age that Beatrice was at the first time that Dante saw her, and then plus 9, she was then 18, the second time that there was a very intense exchange when she saw him and said hi to him in the street. So 9 is really at the center of these events between Dante and Beatrice, and it's not exactly clear what this 9 means here in this scene, but she keeps going back to it as a number. Quando con gli occhi mi percosse, there's always this incredible strength and intensity of Beatrice's gaze into Dante's gaze. We can feel it almost as something physical. He feels hit, almost punched by her gaze. E con tranquillo aspetto, she is going to calmly then ask Dante if he can ask her, basically defeat his own embarrassment and being shy and intimidated by her, and just ask away what he wants to ask her. So we get to verse 34, which is the beginning of Beatrice's monologue, which is a long one, where she finally explains to Dante, she answers the unspoken questions of Dante. Sappi che il vaso che il serpente ruppe fu e non è. Il vaso means the vessel, and so she's referring to the chariot in the previous allegory, in other words, the church, that's been broken by the dragon, by the serpent. Fu e non è. Was, or used to be, and now is not anymore. Extremely strong expression. This was and is not is a literal quotation from John's Apocalypse. In fact, in Apocalypse 17, John wrote, "The beast you saw was and is not." So really there is a literal transposition here. However, what Dante is meaning here is referred to the church, and it could be, according to scholars, either one of these two. Either that this church used to be the church that St. Peter founded, but now it's not that anymore. It's something else, something corrupted and completely different from what it used to be. That's one potential meaning. The second possible meaning is even worse, meaning he means to say that it doesn't exist anymore. It's not anymore. So for God, the church, due to its current corruption in 1300, has ceased to exist. It used to exist, but now it doesn't anymore. So depending on how strong we take this affirmation, it could be one or the other. But chi non colpa, whoever is responsible for this, which Mandelbaum translates as, but he whose fault it is. He is, probably Mandelbaum is thinking about the King of France or the Pope, but it's not a perfect translation because Dante says chi na colpa, e chi means whoever. So it could be the church, the popes, the kings, and all of them together. Chi is a very general and could be plural as well. Using a prophetic tone, Beatrice tells Dante that the empire will not remain vacant forever. It's been vacant, and as we've seen previously, Dante has been complaining about there's not being a presence of an emperor after Frederick II's death, and this being the political background that has fostered the unruly situation that there is in Italy and the necessary corruption of the church with temporal power, in his opinion. Now, Beatrice is going to give him a prophecy here. There's going to be, the empire is not going to be vacant forever, because I can plainly see, and this way I tell you, I am 100% confident. I can see it in the stars that are very close. So it's something that's going to happen very soon in time. We get to this mysterious number, once again taken as an inspiration from the Apocalypse, because in John's Apocalypse we find the mysterious number 666, which was the number of the beast, or the Antichrist number. Here on verse 43, Dante gives us 515, which is 515, or 515. And it's an apocalyptic way or style to give a prophecy for the future, to very likely indicate a figure of power, an emperor, who will come and he will kill la furia, accelerà la furia con quel gigante che con lei delinque. So he will kill the giant that we've seen at the end of the previous canto, and he will kill the thief. Even if Mandelbaum says, will slay the whore, actually la furia in Dante's language means the thief. It's okay, the translation the whore, but literally that's what Dante means. I don't want to be too enigmatic, and here Beatrice quotes Themi, or in English Themis. She was the goddess of justice, and she was giving responses that were very obscure to understand. And also she quotes the famous Sphinx. She was both in the classic mythology and also in the Thebaid by Statius. The Sphinx was protecting the doors of Thebes with enigmas. And I've always loved, in fact, I remember my grandfather telling me about the most famous enigma of the Sphinx when I was very little. And this enigma was, what is that animal that walks in the morning with 4 legs, at noon on 2 legs, and in the evening on 3 legs? And we all know that's the man, the human being. But it's always been a very ingenious little enigma. And in the end, the enigma of the Sphinx was solved in the classic myth by Oedipus, who was a son of Laius, and therefore he was a Naiad. This is why there is a use of the word Naiad at verse 49 by Dante. It's a mistake that he made in line with everybody else in his times, who, because of mistaken transcriptions of the Metamorphoses of Ovid, where Ovid said the Naiad, meaning Oedipus, the mistaken transcriptions would say the Naiad, and as a mistake. Therefore, Dante simply picked up that Naiad and put it here, even if he meant the person who resolved the enigma of the Sphinx. Historically, we all know how much heartfelt hope Dante had for Henry VII of Luxembourg, who was clear in his plans to descend into Italy, the first emperor since Frederick II's death, and resolve the political situation. Dante had put a lot of his hopes politically in this event. The famous Veltro in Inferno 1, Verrà il Veltro, that Dante is talking about, is also very likely referred to a character like Henry VII, or Dante wrote it thinking about Henry VII. So Henry came to Italy in 1310, while Dante was still writing Purgatorio. Unfortunately, in 1313, Henry died because of, I think, malaria, some virus. And sadly, that was the end of these imperial hopes, because it didn't go anywhere. So Dante was extremely disappointed when this happened. But when he's writing this, he's still full of hope. And the meaning of the number can be seen in many different ways. In Latin, if you were to write 515, you would write DXV. And because V and U were written the same, you could simply swap the X and the V and read dux for this 515. And dux means leader, and it was even used for emperor sometimes. So this is one of the interpretations. It's not necessarily exactly what Dante meant, and it's possible also that because this style, prophetic style that he's using, he left it a little bit vague on purpose. But see how every line of this canto is so dense with meaning and with references, because verse 52, Beatrice repeats the very important message to Dante, tu nota, you should take note in the book of your memory about everything that I'm telling you, about this prophecy. And even as I speak these words, make sure that you transmit them in turn to those who live the life that is a race to death. This viver che concorrer alla morte. This is another famous expression of the Divine Comedy, that life is a race to death, but it's not an original creation of Dante, because he took it from St. Augustine. St. Augustine, in fact, used this expression of life as us running towards death. And also Beatrice reminds Dante that he should be careful about talking about all the elements of the divine justice, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that they just saw, e cor 2 volte dirubata quivi, that has now been despoiled twice over here, probably meaning the first time in the times of Adam, and now after all that's just happened with these allegories, the eagle and everything else. Or, according to somebody else, it could be twice, because the first time with the eagle, who came down as the first allegory, and the second time with the giant. Beatrice keeps her tone of harsh severity and towards Dante. She is criticizing his intellect, but for now it's just better that he takes note of what she tells her. The reference to the Acqua d'Elsa, this Elsa river, was a river full of calcareous salts that would basically encrust every object that would be covered with the. So Dante's mind is compared to one of those objects, completely encrusted by these calcareous formations, and therefore not able to think properly, to function properly. Pyramus' blood had reddened and darkened the white of the mulberry flowers, and therefore that's a darkening of his intellect that Beatrice is referring to again. She is comparing Dante's intellect to stone, to being petrified and obscured, almost darkened in 3 different ways, because he was following these vain thoughts. So the question now, which is most important, is what were these vain thoughts that Dante was following? Because in the previous canto, we heard about the Pargolette, this young women that he was following. But we know that there is much more, and he's not simply writing about other women that he fell in love with after Beatrice's death. He's talking most of all about his own philosophy and his own sense of existence, his own right way, la retta via era smarrita. He had lost his way. Let's see exactly what he means with that. Dante tries to reassure Beatrice that his memory will function as best as he can. He compares it to wax, and the sigil of wax, that's the seal, how he's impressed. It's a simile that he already used in a previous canto of the comedy. He liked that type of image. And he also adds the fact that he is making too much of an effort to follow her. He doesn't fully understand what she is saying. That's what he's saying. So here we get finally to the core of the matter. Through Beatrice's voice, Dante is declaring to us what he meant when he said that he lost his way. And if you have already read this canto, you realize that he keeps referring to a certain doctrine, to a certain school of thought, without ever really being very specific about it. But we know today what he was referring to with a very high probability and likelihood. We also know that because we have studied Canto 26 of the Inferno, and in Canto 26, the very deeply heartfelt Ulysses canto, Dante is referring to exactly the same type of mistaken doctrine or mistaken school in between the lines. The reason why Ulysses with his comrades is going down at the bottom of the ocean, is kind of swallowed by the sea, is because Ulysses represents a different Dante, the Dante who was following this particular doctrine. And what doctrine is it? Fundamentally, we're talking about radical Aristotelianism, and the school of Aristotle that was interpreted and taught in a radical way by some specific, especially Muslim philosophers and great thinkers. One of the most prominent one was in fact Averroes. So let me read something very brief about this radical Aristotelianism to try and clarify and see if it makes sense. So, as a synonym of radical Aristotelianism, in the Middle Ages, the word Averroism was used sometimes as well, and some other times even atheism was used as a synonym for this type of current. So we could even hypersimplify and say that Dante's mistaken doctrine was atheism. But let's see what Averroism meant. Averroism was a trend in the medieval philosophy that had been founded by the 12th century Arab philosopher Averroes or Ibn Rashid. Averroism developed the materialistic tendencies of Averroes' interpretation of Aristotle. The church leveraged the power of St. Thomas as a philosopher, as a theologian, to counter that trend that was going in a wrong, mistaken direction. Why was it going in a mistaken direction? Because Averroism was based on the idea of the mortality of the soul versus the immortality of the soul, the theory of double truth, separating and even opposing knowledge to faith and philosophy to theology, versus the integration of these truths in St. Thomas in Christian doctrine. So you can see the big difference there. And also the absence of the creation of the world. So there were some very specific non-Christian pillars in this particular school, and Dante had been attracted by this school, not only because he thought they were right, but also because he was hanging out, let's say, with people, like especially his friend Guido de Cavalcanti, who was definitely, and this is something that we know today, following those type of ideas and those type of thoughts. So maybe there was a friendly conditioning, but in one way or the other, Dante ended up taking the wrong way, not only in his life personally, but also, and most importantly for him, from a philosophical and theological point of view. He swayed away from St. Thomas' way, which is the right way of Christianity, and was attracted and swayed into this Averroism. He never clearly says it, because it might have been also risky to say it, but this is fairly clear and highly probable that this is the point that he's making. So to try to make a long story short and to try to make it as simple as possible, I would say the problem of this philosophy was that based on Averroism, our rationality was enough and sufficient to understand the entire world and the entire universe. So we can understand it today with our modern sensibility by comparing it to atheism. And again, even in those times was almost a synonym of atheism, because only thanks to rationality, today we could say even to science, many people today think that we can understand the entire universe. This is a philosophical position, that stands in contrast, in stark contrast, to a religious, faithful position. So Dante had, in a certain sense, become an atheist. And that is what Beatrice is reprimanding him about. He had lost his faith. He had lost his faith in God. He had lost his faith in the correct way and in the love of God. In a very defensive way, Dante tries to say, I don't remember doing this. I don't remember making myself a stranger to you who are in this moment the revealed truth. And Beatrice says, well, yeah, that makes sense because you've just been washed into the Lite and therefore you've forgotten all of your sins. There is a little bit of a logical problem here where Beatrice says, se dal fumo foco s'argomenta, cotesto oblivion chiaro conchiude. If smoke is proof of fire, then it's clear we can conclude from this forgetfulness of yours that in your will there was a fault. It's not necessarily true that, and directly understandable, that from the fact that Dante has forgotten it, it must mean that he used to think that. But we understand the overall sense of this simile. So it was very important to get to this point because now Dante is finally ready, fully ready, to be purified, to be ready for heaven, ready for Paradiso. Before that, Beatrice had never put him in front of his gravest mistake, in front of his great, let's say, losing his way that he's been lamenting since Canto 1 of Inferno. Now, it's almost as if the circle has closed, and this canto is really referring directly to Canto 1 of Inferno by articulating it better. So at this point, Dante is ready for this rite of purification in the second river of the Garden of Eden, which is the Eunoe, and which has the property of strengthening the memory of everything that is good that we've done during our life. Dante sees the two rivers when they begin, they're at the beginning, and when they separate from one another. Beautiful, he says, like friends. So in a very slow way, because friends don't like to say goodbye to each other. And it's almost funny how, because this was a task that was assigned to Matilda to explain to Dante what these two rivers are and what they do, but Dante doesn't remember. So Matilda tries to defend herself and say, no, actually, I've told him. I've done my task. It's his fault. He's not remembering. And Beatrice understands. She says, well, actually, he was probably so worried for all the great allegory and procession that he saw. And so perhaps some greater care, which often weakens memory, has made his mind grow dark. Another reason for Dante's intellect and memory to have grown dark, the big worry about what is seen in the Garden of Eden so far. As with a noble soul, which offers no excuse, but makes another's will its own, as soon as science revealed their will, Matilda then helped. Really, really, really beautiful, this tercet at verse 130. Among other reasons, because it reminds me immediately of the interior castle by Santa Teresa of Avila. In the interior castle, Saint Teresa is repeating this concept very often. The fact that the really pious and noble souls are not only the ones who act and behave according to the good and the right and according to God's will, but they are also the ones who make somebody else's will their own, and therefore act in their way in a very joyful way, because it becomes their own will, their own desire. And she said with womanly courtesy, which in this particular case it's interpreted as not courtesy but an authority, as with womanly authority. Again, this is the modernity of Dante, giving a lot of spiritual authority to female characters in his comedy. The last tercets are really gorgeous. I'm gonna read them in Italian. Se avessi lettor più lungo spazio da scrivere, I pur canterei in parte. Lo dolce ber che mai non avria sazio. Lo dolce ber che mai non avria sazio resonates with me very deeply and with my heart, because it's one of the most important and profound Christian concepts. He is clearly referring to the water of the Eunoe, but at the same time, without a doubt, He's referring to the doctrine of the water of life. Jesus being the water of life in the episode of the woman, the Samaritan woman at the well, Jesus says, I am the water of life. Whoever drinks from my well will never thirst again. If you drink any other water, you will have thirst again. That's going back to the concept of every human being worshipping by default. But only if we worship God, we will be satisfied. We worship any other thing, including rationality, our ego, friends, relatives, we will still be thirsty. And finally, io ritornai dalla Santissima Onda, rifattosi come piante novelle, rinovellate di novella fronda. Can you hear how many times he's using the root of the word new? Novelle rinovellate di novella fronda. Perfect purification of his soul. He's a new being at this point. Dante, his own being, is renewed. Puro e disposto a salire alle stelle. It's such a moving conclusion of this immense cantica, my favorite cantica out of the entire Divine Comedy. My heartfelt thanks to you for all your support and your interest in this kind of slow-paced read-along and this project of 100 videos for 100 cantos of the Divine Comedy. Thank you very much again.